Okay, welcome back. We're continuing with our work on the five hidden pillars of fate, our video illustration, and we are also continuing with our mini exegesis of the part of spirit and what its role is in the chart. This time we're looking at the chart of Kurt Cobain. So we looked at Paul Newman. We've previously looked at Kurt Cobain when we were dealing with the part of fortune and its role as an ascendant. And we had some very compelling evidence when looking at the throat problems that were chronic in his life and how the actual chart really showed that, how using the part of fortune as an ascendant actually showed that in a very strong way. Now what we're going to look at is the part of spirit. And as I said in the Paul Newman chart, one of the things that one of the analogies I like to use when differentiating between the part of fortune and the part of spirit is to think of the part of fortune as a play. The narrative arc of that play, what happens to the characters in the play, is the part of fortune. The actual characters in the play are the part of spirit. So if we're talking about something like Streetcar Named Desire, the arc of the narrative, the happenings in that play represent fortune. Blanche Dubois would represent spirit in that particular chart, or Stanley Kowalski or her sister Stella. Anyway, I like to consider also, think of it like a Grimm's fairy tale where the prince, who can be represented as spirit, decides to leave the castle in order to seek his fortune. So in order to find whatever is going to be the narrative of his life in that particular from that particular moment that he leaves. Okay, so once again, fortune is kind of like the road that we take. Spirit is the person that takes the road. Spirit animates and personifies the body, which also can be represented by the part of fortune because it is an ascendant, and the ascendant represents the body. Vettius Valens himself, from which this actual stuff comes from, or this actual technique comes from, he says that the moon, being cosmically fate and body and breath, produces something of a like kind, as it is the lady of our body. The sun, being cosmically mind and spirit through its own activity and pleasant nature, since it arouses the souls of men for undertakings, is established as a cause of action and motion. Okay, so action and motion. So the actions that the person takes, that is kind of around, that is revolves the definition, or within that revolves the definition of spirit and the part of spirit. So like Paul Newman, Kurt Cobain's part of spirit is in Aquarius, which is ruled by Saturn. Once again, we're using only the ancient rulerships here. And when I was talking about Paul Newman, I was talking a lot about kind of the steady, serious aspects of Saturn, but I also mentioned that there can be problems with Saturn because Saturn also represents depression and emotional paralysis and things of that nature. And what's different about this chart from Paul Newman's is that there's a very strong stress on emotionalism and sensation. Emotionalism, sensuality, and sensation. And so this Saturn is in Pisces, which is the most sensate of all of them. It's the most sensitive and it's most sensitive of all. And it's with this very, very strong Venus, who's highly sensitive and creative and sensual. But what I'd like to say is that, remember, the Venus is the part of fortune. She is then with this Saturn, and Saturn is the ruler of the 6th house. And we used that when we were talking about his throat, because the 6th house represents illnesses. But the 6th house is also called bad fortune. And it's so that means that the ruler of the 6th then takes on something of a malefic feeling. In this particular case, this Saturn would take on kind of that kind of malefic feel. Thus, this person would be very prone to frustration, would be very prone to depression, would be very prone to maudlin thoughts or black thoughts or pessimism. This would be would be sickly, would be subject to certain types of paralysis, and would be very hypersensitive. So would be so hypersensitive that the things that they were perceiving would lead to these kinds of depressions or pessimisms or whatever. Of course, at the same time, Saturn represents seriousness and a depth of perception and feeling. So we probably have quite a deep person, a deep thinking and deep feeling person, but there would be a very, very strong proclivity, in my opinion, especially because of the rulership of the sixth house and the malefic rulership of the sixth house. There would be a very, very strong proclivity towards depression. That is definitely a Saturnian illness, right? That's one of Saturn's major natures. Also, there might be a strong proclivity towards isolation, because Saturn is called the author of isolation. So these are some of the ways that we can look at spirit, that we can look at the ruler of spirit. I mean, we can look at the ruler of the ascendant and figure out things about the person from that. But by using these 5 pillars of fate, we actually have more information that gives us more of an insight into these people and into what their actions, what the nature of their actions might be. Once again, as I said in the Paul Newman presentation, when we look at the basis, we will be coming back to the part of spirit, because the basis represents the foundational motivation on which those actions are made. Okay, so that's the end of our little section on the part of spirit with Kurt Cobain, and please tune back in. Next time we will be looking at the lot of exaltation and how we find fame in the charts of both of these men. Thanks so much for listening in, and we'll talk to you next time.